good afternoon and welcome. My name is Reverend Nicole Caldwell Gross, and I have the incredible privilege of serving as the pastor of outreach at St. Luke's United Methodist Church. And we are gathered on this cold January Monday to celebrate the life, the legacy, and the dream of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we do that in a special way here at St. Luke's through our annual Dream Keepers panel, where we gather thought leaders from across different areas of leadership here in Indianapolis, rather, to share with us how they are keeping that dream alive through their work today. And what I'm most excited about is that you will not just hear waxing and waning philosophically, but you'll hear about practical strategies and ways that you can give your time and your leadership and your gifts to keeping that dream alive today. So with that said, I invite you now to get your paper, your tablet, your pen. You're going to want to take notes. There's going to be aha moments and light bulbs going off as we hear from these incredible leaders. So let's meet our esteemed panelists. Our first dream keeper is the Reverend Joan Stevens. She is a practical theologian who cares deeply about how theology hits the ground. I love that saying. She is a provisional elder in the Indiana United Methodist Church, and she has previously served as a senior and associate pastor in cross-racial appointments, and now serves as the newly appointed director of the Indiana Conference in the area of diversity, mission, and justice ministries. In this role, she's tasked with leading the Indiana Conference in inclusion, diversity, equity, and anti-racism efforts. Reverend Antra preaches prophetically. I'm excited to hear what she has to say with us today, and courageously across denominational lines. She also holds a Master's of Divinity degree from Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And side note, she is joining with us despite being stricken with COVID today. And so, first of all, you look amazing, probably the most beautiful COVID patient I have ever seen. And we're so grateful that you were willing to join with us anyway and considered this conversation important. Our next dream keeper is State Senator Fadi Kadura, who is no stranger to our St. Luke's community. You have connected with him as he shared words of wisdom at our Stop Asian Hate prayer vigil last year, as well as joined with us in September as we raised money and resources for our Afghan neighbors at Camp Atterbury. But before coming alongside us in that work, he was elected to represent Indiana's Senate District 30 in November of 2020. Before this election, Senator Kadura was already an experienced public servant working on behalf of the people of Indiana in the Indiana General Assembly, the Department of Workforce Development, and the Family and Social Services Administration, in addition to serving as CFO for the city of Indianapolis in 2016. He's had a lot of experience. Senator Kadura received both a bachelor's and master's of computer science from the University of New Orleans. I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in the cuisine that you may have sampled there, so maybe we can sprinkle that into our conversation. And in addition, he holds a master's of public administration and public affairs and nonprofit management, as well as a doctorate in philanthropy and public policy from IUP-UI. Senator Kadura, we are so grateful that you are here and sharing with St. Luke's once again. And our final dream keeper is Ryan Calvin. And I so enjoyed reading that the opening sentence of his bio says that he is foremost a husband and a father. He shared with us that his children may join into the conversation. For those of us who have been on Zoom for the last 2 years, we know what that's like, and we look forward to the next generation of dream keepers. But Ryan also serves as the Director of Program Operations for the Indianapolis Freedom School Partnership. And you'll be seeing a lot of Ryan and some of the leaders from IFSP as St. Luke's is launching our very first Freedom School this summer. He works alongside the Executive Director, Clifton Snorton, leading operations for CDF Freedom School sites throughout the city of Indianapolis. He began his journey with CDF Freedom Schools at The Ohio State University. I have learned from experience that I have to say The Ohio State University. Is that correct? Okay, I'm still on track. Where he served as a servant leader intern at the Circleville Correctional Facility site. He has also been a servant leader intern in the city of Chicago and a site coordinator in Indianapolis. Ryan began his professional career in education as a science teacher, and he now works with Teach for America to recruit and develop new teachers to the city of Indianapolis. I know that everyone listening can see why we wanted to be in conversation with these incredible leaders. And while you all come from very different areas of leadership and are leading our city forward in different ways, you're each united in your shared admiration and inspiration as you think about the life and the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So I wonder if we might start our conversation there and pose to each of you, what about his life inspires you, and how does that translate into the work that you're doing today? Reverend Antra, can we start with you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm so excited and honored. And I am excited about St. Luke hosting a freedom school. I just have to say that. And so, Ryan, kudos. And I would just love to see how my department may be able to sponsor some children if there is a need. So if there is cost and we can sponsor some kids from the inner city to come to Freedom School, we would love to do so. I'm excited and passionate about that. So I am inspired most by King's love ethic. His prophetic witness and fearlessness for me was an embodiment of true discipleship, which is to love, right? The word tells us that they will know we are disciples by our love. And so for me, King left a legacy that continues to extend an invitation to all of us to live into this call of agape love. And that call of agape love, this goes beyond simply seeing someone in the image of God. It costs nothing to see someone in the image of God, but true love costs. True love takes risks. True love, when we are living into this embodiment of love, you will keep going forward, even in the face of fear, trusting that God is with you, trusting that justice work is indeed God work. And so for me, King lived this life of love. Everything that he did was because of love. I even believe that his letter from a Birmingham jail, that was a love letter. It was a love letter to our Christian, brothers at that time. And this translates to my work today because so many colleagues may be behaving in ways and believing in theologies that do not promote love, that do not lead to love, that do not embody love. And King talks about the laxity of the white moderate, right? Just being very lackadaisical about issues of justice. That does not promote love for anyone. And so I would say that for me, it is just this embodiment of love. And colleagues ask me all the time, Antra, your gifts are needed in the Black church. Why would you keep serving in the United Methodist Church when you could use your gifts elsewhere? Well, King showed us that responding to the call, that's an act of love. We don't get to choose where God is going to call us. We hear the call and we say yes and we go. And love compels us to keep going, even when I would say that the journey gets difficult. Even when your colleagues may sometimes act in unlovable ways. But because of King's witness, I am encouraged to keep going, to keep loving. That means keep teaching, keep having patience, and keep working for truth and justice, and just modeling what it means to live into our moral agency of just living out our prophetic witness and I would say, our commitment to the Word of God in my area of work. So for me, it's his embodiment of love.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. So that ethic of love is really the foundation for you. I wonder, Ryan, what about King's legacy speaks to you, and how does that translate into your work and leadership?
Definitely. First, thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. And Reverend Stevens will definitely be in contact around how you can help our freedom schools over the summer. So I'm excited to see your enthusiasm. When I think about King and just thinking about like my role with freedom schools, as well as just my sphere in the educational world here in Indianapolis, I think about his commitment to education. His own education. You think about one of the first things I learned as a child about Martin Luther King is that he went to college at 15, right? And he goes to Morehouse, great HBCU, and he continues his studies, right? And he goes to Boston and gets his PhD. But then it becomes a lifelong learner, right? He learns from different theologians across backgrounds. And he learns from Gandhi, right? He goes and studies nonviolence. So I love, or even when he think about being from Chicago, where he goes and like and dwells in the slums of Chicago to learn about what are the lived experiences of folks in the North, because that was something he wasn't necessarily familiar with. So I love that he was a lifelong learner. And then also, too, he had a passion for young people. If you think about his partnership with SNCC, right, and wanting to get students involved. And while there were disagreements sometimes between the two organizations, he also he valued their voice. So I love, like when I reflect on Dr. King, I think about his passion about his own education and being a lifelong learner, but also around getting students and getting young people involved in the movement for justice.
So we've got love and we've got learning. Round it out for us, Fadi. What about like King's legacy speaks most to you, and how does that translate into your leadership today?
Well, first, good morning, and I appreciate you for giving me this opportunity to join you. It's extremely difficult to follow my esteemed colleagues with their eloquency of talking about the inspirational work of Dr. King. I think I would just choose the word courage. Um, at the age of 39, Dr. King made the ultimate sacrifice. He gave his entire life for what he believed in. He accomplished in his 39 years old or 39 years on this earth what many were not able to accomplish in double that age span. But courage, I think, speaking at a time of silence, where he described being silent is a form of betrayal. His statements when he inspired us that there were moments in life where you have to be courageous. And I quote when he said, "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But consciousness asks the question, is it right?" And there comes a time when a person or one must take a position that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but one must take it because it is right. And that inspires me. He spoke not only to the atrocities of injustice here in the United States, but he spoke to every human across the globe who felt that they don't have a seat at the table, that their voices were taken away from them, that they were treated either as a second-class citizen or as a less dignified human being. To stand up and oppose policies of your own government, of your own nation, takes a lot of courage. And unless we have the moral principles, the foundational values that we believe in, then it would be extremely difficult for a person to take such a principled stand. I think Reverend Stevens talked about a little bit the idea of love. When Dr. King said that hatred is too much of a burden, so he chose love. And what we need most today in our society, people who can love, people who can be courageous, and engage in our advocacy and championship for justice, because as we know from his teachings that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So that courageousness, that ability to articulate a vision for a better world by which people are treated equally with love and compassion, is unbelievably inspiring and very applicable to today. It inspires me to be courageous and be thoughtful and to stand up every day for those who are marginalized or those who do not have voices in our communities.
Mhm. You know, as I think about that, that last guiding word of courage, I think it also maybe encapsulates a little bit of where I am, because as so many of you have said, his life was so expansive that there's so much to take. I mean, it's hard to give a 5-minute answer what inspires you about one of the most inspiring people that perhaps ever lived. But one of the things, particularly this year, that's inspiring me about his life is persistence. We have a tradition in our family that every Martin Luther King Day, we have 3 kids and they have to memorize a piece of one of his speeches. And my son is working on a piece from I've Been to the Mountaintop. So I made him listen to it first and he said, "Wait, Mom, did he know he was going to die? Did he know that this was unsafe?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, then why did he do it?" And it was that challenge of, I can't believe that this person's love ethic, their what they learned about injustice in their community and in our country, and the courage to keep doing that anyway, led him to this place of really risking it all, of seeing the barriers and deciding to keep moving. And I wonder if you could speak to that for a moment. What are some of the ways in which racism and exclusion shows up in your work? And how are you persisting and moving forward anyway? Let's start with you first, Ryan, with that question. How would you respond to that?
I think about how this can show up in our work. One, it can just look like a lack of representation for teachers, right? In my role as Teach for America, a big part of we were hoping to do is to bring diversity to the classroom so students can have teachers and role models who look like them and have similar life experiences with them. Getting to, hopefully I'm not getting too political here. I'm gonna choose courage, like Dr. King said, but I think about what Senator Kador is going through in terms of bills and laws being passed around, like what's it look like to teach history and to teach a history to students of color, to know where they come from. And that's damaging. So when we exclude our history from classrooms and we exclude role models for being teachers, like that's damaging to our students. And that is something that in my work with Teach for America, I believe that we're fighting through. And then also too, with my work at Freedom Schools, we want to celebrate who our students are. Too often, media or just any representation we can see, like folks of color aren't always celebrated and aren't always looked upon as role models and positive citizens. And we fight that narrative hard with Freedom Schools. We celebrate our culture, we celebrate our music, we celebrate our history, and that is something that happens throughout the entire summer of Freedom Schools. And then it happens year after year for those families that continue to be a part of our program. So those are the ways I think that we're trying to fight that exclusion and that racism that leads into the education system.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. And you referenced a little bit of how that potentially may show up in Fadi's work. I wonder if you might provide a deeper response or reflection on where you see those barriers showing up in your work and what you're doing to persist through them.
Well, I appreciate the question. So we are humans. We are impacted by the environments by which we were raised within, the people who raised us, our parents, the schools that we attended, universities we went to, the work environment, the neighborhoods we lived in. So people bring their own biases to the world or their worldviews that may inform or shape some biases. And some of these are blind, unconscious biases that we might not fully recognize until someone else helps us see our blind sides and understand that we may have been limited by our life experiences to understand a certain topic in a certain way. So as legislators, when we show up at the General Assembly, we bring that background with us, these worldviews. We bring the understanding of how we see the world and how we interact with the citizens of this world and how that shapes public policy. And some of these ideas translate into legislation that sometimes we have to push back. There's a great example that Ryan just mentioned, the idea of passing, for example, educational policies that may prevent teachers from taking a position on events of great impact on teaching and educating and raising a generation of young Hoosiers who should be well-rounded, well-educated, well-informed, civically engaged to understand the atrocities and injustices of the past. We cannot be neutral on the issue of slavery. We cannot be neutral on the issue of the Holocaust. We cannot be neutral on ideologies that aim to destroy other human races that might not align with someone's vision or view for the world. We entrust our teachers every single day to shape and develop the well-being of our kids. They are social beings and they have social needs. And we as humans we've studied the hierarchy of needs for humans. So our kids are not machines. They're not computers. I'm a computer scientist. I can program a computer to think for itself, but I can't program a human being who may have experienced trauma or difficult life experiences, then walks into the classroom and treat that human being as a machine. So it's critical that in my work to identify whether intentional or unintentional biases and types of legislation that intends, whether intentional or unintentionally, to segregate, to discriminate, or to treat people unfairly. And that's in every single piece of legislation that impacts our systems in society, whether that's education, criminal justice, healthcare, housing, you name it. So Dr. King, and I'll conclude on that thought, it's amazing that he was a man of faith, yet he was engaged in changing the policies and the institutions of our society. Mm-hmm. While he relied on the power of prayer, he didn't sit on the sideline praying to God that God changes the conditions of humanity. And that's why I was extremely inspired by talking about policies and politics. I always ask my students at IUPUI, I tell them, what is one of the most powerful speeches that Dr. King has ever delivered? And most of my students would say, I have a dream. And indeed, that's very famous. But to me, and that's a personal opinion, one of the most powerful speeches that he has ever delivered was the speech that he delivered on April 15th of 1967 in New York City in opposition to the war in Vietnam. And he basically said that it is one of the most difficult things on earth that a person opposes the policies of their own nation. Yet he quoted the philosopher Dante, and he borrowed his quote, and he said that he agrees with it, where he said, the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a period of a moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. Mm. We cannot be neutral on issues of right and wrong. We cannot be neutral on issues of truth versus falsehood or evil. So I'm inspired by his life, by his legacy, by his courageousness, by his persistence, that I bring that attitude, that approach, that understanding to the work that I do every single day on every single piece of legislation.
Mm-hmm. So that persistence, I'm sure, also translates not only into the work of education and politics and legislation, but also the work of theology, the work of community development in the church. Antra, share with us how you would respond to that, where you see barriers of racism in your work and how you persist to move forward despite them.
Yes. So, King described 11 o'clock as one of the most segregated hours in America. And unfortunately, that is still so, and specifically in the United Methodist Church. And so we still have many of our congregations where the inside of the church does not reflect the community in which the churches are located. So many churches are still very insular and not community focused. We have many churches, as a whole, the church, Big C Church, continues to tolerate racism and sexism. And so we still have churches that will not accept a Black person, a person of color, or a woman as their servant leader. We still have, it is a fact that white men serve our largest congregations, thus receive the highest salaries. So there are a lot of equity issues that are present in the church. And, King says that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. We have clergy persons that will not touch the subject of racism, not in their preaching or in their teaching. They may mention something briefly in a prayer, but that's about it. They will not speak about things that are happening in society. And so I know the pain of belonging to, a predominantly white congregation, and there being, something big that has happened out in the world where I come to church and my heart is broken and my heart is heavy and I am grieving, and there's not a word in church. No, it just has gone right over folks' head. And so, we have clergy persons that are seminary trained, have master's degrees, but for the sake of comfort and because they're not willing to take risks, will not use their voice, their power, or their privilege to speak out against racism and injustice. And Senator Fadi spoke to our blind, unconscious biases that we are all raised with, that we all have them. And so we're aware of that. And so in my area, what we are doing is we are working to reduce implicit bias and to increase our intercultural competency. So I've been trained as an IDIQA. So trained to administer the intercultural development inventory that shows how we develop on a continuum from having a monocultural mindset to an intercultural mindset, helps us to understand how we respond and react when we encounter difference. And so we are administering the IDI. We're starting with the top down, beginning with the bishop and the cabinet, beginning with our leadership development, church development, our board of ordained ministries, our DCOMs, starting at the top and then working our way down into the congregations. We're teaching the truth about Methodism, racial history, and doing all that we can to awaken the moral conscience of our clergy and laity here in Indiana. We're having courageous conversations. So we're having conversations around critical race theory. And I know that having such conversations are going to result in emails and phone calls, right? But what's an email or phone call when folks are out here dying? When people's lives are being cut short, when our children are being miseducated and undereducated, right? So we're talking about voting rights. We're encouraging congregations to get involved in politics. It is a lie to say that we in the church should not be political. How are we reading through the Old Testament? How are we reading the prophets and still maintaining that we as people of God should not be political? Now, we shouldn't be partisan, right? I can't tell people you need to go vote for Senator Fadi, although I'd like to, but I can't, right? But I say that you need to get into the game because politics affects the lives of the people that are sitting in our pews. And so we ought to have something to say about policies that are impacting people's lives. And as United Methodists, we have social principles to guide us that help us to have a theological understanding of where we should stand regarding certain issues. And so we're teaching, we're confronting, we're challenging, teaching, and doing more teaching. And so I do not negate the power of teaching and going back to the basics, because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. Even I, as a Black woman who has had the foot of the oppressor on my neck for my entire life, did not know anything about justice or my responsibility to it until I went to seminary. Because I grew up in a Black church that did not talk about the issues, that was post-racial, that was colorblind, right? Prosperity gospel. I did not know what I did not know until I went to seminary. And so I have grace and patience that there are many people, some know, but there are many that do not. And so we continue to teach and challenge and confront and inspire.
Mhm. Well, I feel like we should take the offering after those responses. Very inspiring and challenging as we think about the road ahead and keeping this dream alive. And as you were sharing about your intercultural development work, you talked about that starting with conversation and courageous conversations. And Fadi, I'm thinking about the fact that so many of us aren't even willing to have conversations anymore, right? Not willing to listen to each other. And yet, it's Martin Luther King's words that so many of us are quoting. It's those words that moved us to consciousness and then action and legislation that changed the world. How do we continue the legacy of his work when we're so divided that we can't even listen? What would you say to that?
Well, I appreciate the question. I will just comment on the idea of politics. I dislike politics with a passion. And one of the unfortunate things that I struggle with in my job is that the moment that I became an elected official, I felt that I'm viewed as a politician. And I have to evolve out of that because I think I firmly believe that politics is about the ability to influence thoughts and ideas. And unfortunately, that term politics, because of partisan politics, because of polarization, it became a negative term that discouraged many people from engaging in our political system. But conversations began with building trust and building relationships. At the Indiana State Senate, I've learned from my first day that the individuals that I serve with may have the best of intentions on earth. They might have different backgrounds and circumstances, that even though I disagree with their policies, I need to invest time and effort to get to know them, to understand their motivation, to understand their communities, because I can easily maybe win an argument against a piece of legislation, but lose the relationship with a person who I might be able to influence for the rest of their lives. So the idea is that it's not just winning an argument, it's winning the heart and the mind of the other person, to have them allies and supporters of the ideas that promote justice and equality and peace and freedom and liberty. Dr. King's struggle was not to win an argument. He did not see a world by which a certain group of people is going to win an argument in their public policy or political agenda. It was more about how can we unify all of us. And actually, in his last speech, we'll get to talk about his last few words. But in the same speech, when he was giving the analogy that if God spoke to him and offered him to live through a certain period of time, which period would he choose? And he delivered a long speech about, walking us or taking us through history from the ancient Egyptians till today. And he said that he would be happy to live in the second half of the 20th century. And then and I quote, he said, "Now that's a strange statement to make because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land. Confusion all around. That's a strange statement." But he said, "I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars." And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men in some strange way are responding. He said, something is happening. Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up. And wherever they are assembled today, whether they are in Johannesburg, South Africa, and New York City, Atlanta, Jackson, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, he said, the cry is always the same. We want to be free.
Mhm.
So that optimism, that hope, that dream, even the political system to change, to be sure that we give sanitation workers in Memphis, give them their right, to be sure that the individuals who are socially and economically disadvantaged because society crippled their opportunities to be treated equally. We're not asking for special treatment for any group. We're just asking for equal treatment under the law. We're asking for equal opportunity under the law. We're asking for equal treatment as citizens under the law. So he was extremely an optimist and inspirational and engaged in the political system at the highest level, from the White House all the way to local city, county government, because he firmly believed that changing institutions and policies will impact the masses.
Mhm. And I think that that's such an important word for us now because many of us are coming off the holidays, sitting with family around tables, like the table some of you may be watching us from. And it's hard to engage and build relationships when you're focused on winning the argument. Instead of investing in the relationship long term and what that long term investment in relationship could actually lead someone towards. As I think about that, kind of that long term next generation, I want to turn to you, Ryan, because you work directly with the next generation. And when Fadi talked about King's speech of walking us through history. And when we look at some of the future projections of where our country is going and where the country that we are leaving for the next generation, the prognosis is not great. So, what wisdom would you share with those who are working with the next generation, and what we can do today to help shape the justice leaders of tomorrow?
Yeah, so I think about a mentor of mine. I don't know where she got this from. Some famous person probably quoted this. She stole it, but she just talked about you can't be what you can't see. And if we want our future generations, right, to be united, right, to be one, to be able to have like positive conflict resolution methods, I think we need to model it ourselves, and we need to lean into it. What the senator was talking about, and be vulnerable, right? So, like, what I'm hopeful is that I'm leaning into having conversations with folks I disagree with, right, and I necessarily don't see eye to eye with, and sharing those stories with the next generation and allowing our students to understand, like, okay, like, all right, if Mr. Ryan like truly disagrees with this person, but like they're also like volunteering at freedom schools with us, like I don't get it, right? And that's just true. I would just share like a brief story
Mhm.
just my own life when it was around summer 2020. Things are crazy. And I'm a member of a pretty white church, and I had another guy come and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And I'm just like, at that moment, I was like, "Let me be real." And I said, "I'm not doing good right now. Like, they killing black folks. Like, and they're talking crazy about black folks because we're upset about it, right? And I'm not doing good." And literally, like me being vulnerable there, I don't know where that came from, but like me being vulnerable has created a friendship between me and that man. And we've talked, and we don't see eye to eye, like politically just different, political in the sense of partisan politics, right? Just different, but we want to see, we care about the same things, and we care about, and we've grown to care about each other, right? So I think it looks like me being vulnerable in that aspect, and then like me bringing him around, my kids, me bringing him around the kids that I work with in Freedom School, so they can see like, hey, people who don't always get along or who don't always agree can still get along. They can still work towards justice together and work towards a common good. So, like, just to reflect on this, just kids can't be what they can't see. Right now, we are modeling division. We are modeling talking bad about people that we disagree with. That's what we're modeling. We're not modeling love right now. And I think if we can flip that, then it should still just fall in line. And okay, like mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, like they got along people they disagree with, and that's just what's natural for me.
Mm. You cannot be what you cannot see. That is certainly one of the aha moments that I think we'll take from our conversation. Reverend Antra, I want to turn to you because As we have shared so many of Dr. King's kind of famous speeches and writings, many of them are rooted in spiritual language. And yet we know from the Pew Center that the fastest growing group are those who do not affiliate with any kind of organized religion, or even say that they are not looking to ever affiliate with organized religion. And I wonder how we can continue to do the work of justice when it seems as if the church has lost this moral authority in the country. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I thought of, I went and found a quote from John Wesley in his Thoughts Upon Methodism, which he stated, "I'm not afraid that the people called Methodists should ever cease to exist, either in Europe or America, but I am afraid lest they should exist only as a dead sect, having a form of religion without any power." And Dr. King reminds us in his letter from a Birmingham jail that there was a time when the church was very powerful, when the church was a thermostat that transformed society instead of being a thermometer that simply recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. And so, like King, I share a deep love and a deep disappointment with the laxity of the church. So yes, we can point to St. Luke's, we can point to Broadway UMC, First UMC in Bloomington, Goben, St. Andrew. There are a few churches that we can point to that are really committed to this justice work. But when I think of the fact that the Indiana United Methodist Conference has over 1,047 churches, I should not be able to easily name the number of churches that are prophetic and unapologetically anti-racist. They should be too many to name. And unfortunately, that is not the case. And so the church is losing its moral authority because, as King stated, so often the church has a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. The church has become an arch defender of the status quo. And sadly, because of that, we are being written off by this large segment of justice seekers. But the records show that young folk and also non-religious folks are still connecting and doing justice work with churches that are committed to this work. So there are many churches that are thriving and that are opening their doors up to folks who are non-religious. But folks have no desire to be connected to churches that are not relevant, that cannot speak to what is happening in this day and age. I'm reminded of a conversation I recently had with a clergy spouse. She said, Antra, if you were lost in rural Indiana and the sun was going down and you had no cell phone and needed help, and you look up and there are two houses, one has a Christian flag and the other has a Buddhist statue on the porch, which door are you knocking on in Indiana with the sun going down for help? Mm. Reverend Nicole, I'm knocking on the Buddhist house. I'm knocking on the Buddhist door. And you know why? Because I don't know what type of Christian I'm getting. Mm-hmm. I don't know what type of Christianity one believes in. Is it white supremacist? Is it one that does not believe if you're not baptized in the name of Jesus, then you ain't saved? One that does not believe in women? I really don't know what I'm going to get, but I know if I knock on this Buddhist door, I'm more than likely getting someone that believes in nonviolence, that's working towards enlightenment, that really is living into their vows. And so how do we continue this work of justice when the church is losing its position as a moral authority? We continue to build bridges to beloved community. And that's what's here on my shirt. In Against Racism, building bridges to beloved community. How do we do that? We have to become better neighbors and expand our definition of neighbor. Our definition of neighbor, it's not just the other Christian down the street. It's not just the white Christian, the Mexican Christian down the street. This is going to require us to be very intentional, as Ryan talked about, building relationships with people that don't look like us, that do not believe like us. It's going to require some intentional, intergenerational, intercultural, interdenominational, interfaith, and building relationships with folks who are non-religious. As long as you are like-minded and have a passion for truth and justice, we need to be able to link up and get this work done. And for churches, I would say that churches ought to be finding, so too many of our churches after 12 noon, ain't nothing going on anyway. Why not open up your doors to a grassroots organization, to an organization that is doing this work, and offer free space to folks so that they can have a space to meet and get justice work done? It doesn't matter if they don't profess our beliefs. Does their work align with what we believe? Is it rooted in love? Right? And so I end with a quote from Malcolm X. Listen, Malcolm said, "I'm for truth no matter who tells it. I'm for justice no matter who it's for or who it's against. I'm a human being, first and foremost, and as such, I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. Does it benefit humanity? Are you walking in a love ethic? Are you justice-minded? Then let's link up and let's get this work done. I don't care if you worship on a Saturday, I worship on a Sunday, you cover your head, I don't. If it's rooted in love and it's rooted in justice, we need to get the work done. And so we have to do better. We're always talking about being good neighbors. We have got to expand our definition of who our neighbor is. And so that's my response.
Yeah. You know, so much of what you said has been a part of our work at St. Luke's over the last couple of years and making this commitment to becoming an anti-racist church. And this led us to relationship with the Asian American community and to host a prayer vigil, an interfaith prayer vigil, because our neighbors were being attacked and because we're expanding that definition, not just neighbors that live in this 5-mile radius, but that love ethic neighbor that Jesus talks about in the Good Samaritan. Is the person who needs help. That's the person who becomes my neighbor. I see that being lived out in our minority business incubator. This time last year, we talked about how justice for marginalized communities doesn't simply mean educational access or it doesn't mean housing access or political access. It also means economic empowerment. And so as a congregation, we partnered with the Crooked Creek Community Development Corporation and launched this incubator, which has supported 3 minority entrepreneurs starting their businesses. And so there are just some ways in which whoever and wherever you're watching from, you can do this work in your own community. And it will often require you working with people outside of your congregation. And it will connect you with people, again, of different religious backgrounds, but who have gifts to bring to that work. I think that one of the gifts of this conversation has been listening to your different areas of leadership and the unique ways that King's legacy informs what you're doing. And I want us to go on a trip together. At the end of his life, King talked about getting to the mountaintop. And I imagine that for Fadi and Ryan and Netra, the mountaintop may look different because of what you do. And I just ask that you take us to that place where that mountaintop may be for you and what hope you see in the future from where you serve. Fadi, can we start with you?
I appreciate the question. Dr. King's last speech is the most inspirational speech that impacted my life. Personally, as a person who came to the United States as an immigrant raised by a hardworking family, coming from a place that struggled politically, where there was a violent political conflict, seeing the beautiful, the 3 major religions of the globe in Jerusalem and other places, and how people worshipped and being inspired by the good work that people have done. And then coming to the United States, where I lived in Louisiana, and I started seeing the contradiction between As an immigrant, when I landed in the United States, I viewed, and it was my perception that the United States is heavens and earth, and there are no more issues of injustice and treatment of humans as less dignified or as second-class citizens. And I lived in my community and I worked in my community, and especially as a new member of the New Orleans community, especially with my brothers and sisters in the Black and the Brown community. They led me, they inspired me, they guided me, they helped me understand what does it mean to live in a new nation as a new arrival, as a new immigrant. And it reminded me of Dr. King's, one of his famous statements when he said, we might have all arrived on different boats or different ships, but we're in the same boat. Some of us were brought here against their own wills, and some came to escape persecution, and others came for a better life opportunity. So regardless of what time we came, and regardless of whether we were forced to come here or it was willingly and intentionally, I started seeing the contradictions of how we mistreated one another as humans. And I became homeless after Hurricane Katrina. We lost everything, my wife and my kids, and we lost everything we owned, and we lived through temporary homelessness. The point I'm trying to say as it relates to my mountaintop is that when you go through tough life experiences, you start developing a more authentic view of the world that you live in. And you start better understanding your purpose, because now you can't take everything for granted. And walking in the shoes of a homeless person like I did, I developed a deeper appreciation of what does it mean to be hungry? What does it mean not to have a shelter? What does it mean that you have no access to healthcare when my oldest daughter was only 3 weeks old after Hurricane Katrina? What does it mean for someone like my family, where I lost my brother-in-law to gun violence? So when you go through these types of experiences, and you know that God gave you a gift, which is the gift of life, that every single day that He renews your contract to wake up that morning, then you need to be inspired and hopeful that your life has a meaning, your life has a purpose, your life has a mission. And I don't want to live a life by which I can look at my bank account and how much I accumulated in this life. I don't want to look at my life and look back and say, you know, while I really appreciate a good vacation after working hard, you can probably see from my looking at my face, I went to sleep last night at 2:00 in the morning, still working on legislation. And last week I attended committees to the tune of 8 hours for a single committee. And with constituent work, it gives me a great honor to be a public servant, but it takes a lot of time and effort and demand on my physical and my mental abilities to serve every single day with honor. So where I'm going with all of that is to say, unless you develop a realistic perspective of your mission and purpose, and unless you speak from the heart, and unless you know exactly what is your mountaintop and what you want to see, then we might live a life that might not fully allow us to reach our full potential.
Mhm.
When I looked at, we are lucky to have a YouTube video of Dr. King's last few words. And I couldn't believe it the first time that I found it, I couldn't believe it that I was sitting there and listening and watching Dr. King speak. And when he said that longevity has its place, and all of us, we like anybody, I would like to live a long life, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go to the mountaintop, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. Now, sometimes I joke, I say, I came from the promised land. That's Jerusalem. But I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So to me, my promised land is the land of justice, is the land when every child, regardless of where they came from, where they were born, the color of their skin, who they love, that every child, every person, every citizen is treated equally with love and with respect and with compassion. I'll conclude by saying this. One of my mentors once said, if you really want to know what your passion is, think about what makes your heart cry and what makes it sing. And I physically and literally cry when I see someone hungry. I cry when I see people that are denied the opportunity to live a dignified life for no reason except because of how God created them. And it's not just about race, it's not just about the color of the skin. That's one major area. But when you look at individuals with different physical abilities, with different mental abilities, when you look at our kids that attend our schools, the way that they might treat one another. So we need to start early teaching about justice, because it's not something that we can only teach to one generation and then stop. It's something that has to be taught to every generation, just like the ideas of democracy. And we must be in the business as dream keepers of being inspirational, of being hopeful, because when Dr. King delivered that speech and he said that he's made it to the mountaintop and he looked over and he saw the promised land, that was not at a time when the Black and the brown communities and everybody who experienced injustice have fully reached their goals, whether the political or policy goals. It was at a time when specifically my brothers and sisters in the Black community were actually still being thrown in jails, were hosed with hot water, and police dogs were unleashed on them, and churches were bombed, and kids were mistreated, and segregation in our schools. And when he delivered that speech, he didn't complain, he didn't whine. He said, I'm hopeful, I'm courageous. I understand how magnificent our work is, and I understand the difficulty of our job.
Mhm.
But we can't be in the business of being pessimistic, because we cannot afford that. So my mountaintop is that, to see a very hopeful, beautiful world by which all of us live with love, compassion, and equality and freedom for every single human being.
Mhm. So we have been to the Senator Kadura mountaintop, and especially someone who came again from the promised land to maybe the promised land of Indiana. So we appreciate that tour. Let's move over to Ryan Calvin's mountaintop. Tell us what that looks like, what you see, and what words of hope you'd have for us today.
Definitely. So, as I think about my mountaintop or our mountaintop, right, we'll all share in this promised land. I look at Teach for America Indianapolis as our community statement, and it's student empowering education. We envision the day where all Indianapolis children will lead lives of their choosing and contribute to a more vibrant and just, no, to a more vibrant and just city. So I think it's like that, right, where we have in the world of education, right, we recognize that unfortunately you can kind of guess like what a school is, how a school is performing, and
Mm.
what the student's achievement level can be based off where that school is, or if you see a school photo, what those kids look like. And that's just wrong. And I can't even think of some deep way to say it. It's just wrong, and it is stupid and it's mean, right? It's like a little kid there, but that's just what it is. So when I think about the mountaintop, it's not only all these kids can go to college, um, uh, but live a life of their choosing. We're a student who can do what they want to do and then contribute to our city. I think everybody wants to contribute. Everybody wants to play a part, and especially when we're playing a part in a more just and vibrant city. Everybody wants to know that their city is fun and it's loving and it's just. So I think as we um, think about our mountaintop, that's what it looks like to me. And I would add that it I think and I know Reverend Antra is going to speak, our mountaintops can't be separated. I think, especially in the realm of education and seeing students live these lives of their choosing, it's going to take folks praying, and it's going to take the church working. It's going to take senators and mayors and congressmen. It's going to take folks making the correct policies. I don't know if we can necessarily detach our mountaintops, because I think they all are going to work together and align together, and eventually get us what we're hopeful to be, and where what Dr. King saw in regards to his mountaintop.
So you have already grown it, right? So we're not talking about mountaintops, we're talking about mountain ranges now. So Reverend Antra, take us to your peak within the range. Tell us what it looks like and what word of hope you'd have for us that are listening.
Yeah, so I struggled a little with that question, and Senator Fadi and Ryan, they have answered it so eloquently. Um, I would say that for me, I'm just a prisoner of hope. I refuse to just not hope, to not believe in a better tomorrow. And so I find hope right now in the awakening, the stirring, and the wrestling. And so we often say, stay woke. Well, in my work, I have an opportunity to be in conversation with people that are just waking up, and they are just as important. The folks who are just waking up, I find hope in a conversation with with a woman who, as we're talking about intercultural competency, and we're talking about her, how she grew up, and then she says, I I remember seeing the KKK hood in my grandfather's closet, and she's now making those connections, and slowly but surely she's speaking up at school board meetings in ways, and asking questions. Why aren't there any Hispanics or any Black people on this committee? So just that awakening where she's just now, eyes are becoming open, and beginning to ask questions. I find hope in cross-racial ministry, which I've been a part of, with you and Reverend Joan are a part of too, where we get to be in relationship with folks, and learn from one another. And there's something about just preaching in my authentic way, and having someone come and say, I've been in church all my life, and I never knew that justice had anything to do with my walk as a Christian. So in the awakening, and in the wrestling, right, being a part of a church where this person has this awakening, and then they leave the church because they said we ain't moving fast enough on justice issues. So now they're going to the church up the street because they doing a little more. So for me, I'm finding hope in that. Um, Digging into people's personal stories. When I think of my mountaintop, um, it is in the Maasai. It's the Maasai tribe in Africa. There is a word, Kasirian Ingera. They would say to one another, Kasirian Ingera, instead of saying hello. And that means, and how are the children? My mountaintop would be that we describe the power of this nation, not based on our military success and how strong it is, our military power, not based on our economic power, but that we would base how strong of a nation we are on how the children are doing. How are the children? When we can greet each other and we can say, and how are the children? And we can answer and say the children are doing well, because there's no economic gap between folks. The children are not being pushed out of schools based on the color of their skin, when we can say that the children are doing well, because there is no more school to prison pipeline. So we're no longer looking at reading scores to determine how many prisons we're going to need in the future, because all the children, they're thriving and they are excelling, and all the children are being resourced, and all the children are being fed, and all the children are being taught about financial literacy, and the children are doing well. And so from my mountaintop, we would be able to ask the question, and how are the children? And we can look at each other regardless of what sector we are in the church, in politics, in education, in the hood, wherever. And I can say, Reverend Nicole, the children, all the children, not just my children, all the children are doing well.
Mhm. Well, I'm sure for those of us that are listening, we want to be at each of these mountaintops. And that really brings us to our closing question, because as we are wrestling with this work of justice, and I look at, Senator Fadi said, I was up till 2 last night. I had all of this other work before I know the work of being a conference staff person in the United Methodist Church. And my husband and I have started freedom schools at our 2 previous congregations. All of this takes a lot of work, and it can leave you weary. And then you layer on top of that this continued pandemic and how weary that makes us as well. And you talk about stay woke, Reverend Antra. Some of us are having difficulty physically staying awake just because of all of the things we're trying to balance. As your closing thought, what do you say to those who are weary, balancing this social pandemic, this medical pandemic, and how we continue moving forward in the face of that weariness? Senator, would you start us off with that?
Absolutely. I promise you, I didn't drink coffee yet, but once I get my first cup of coffee, I'll be a little more energetic this morning. But I am not deterred or discouraged by the amount of work that I personally have to do. Actually, it inspires me. It keeps me going. It gives me purpose. And who I am to complain about my being tired, whether physically at this moment or the amount of hours that I spend in public service compared to the life and legacy of Dr. King, who gave his life to help spread the word of hope and justice. To those who might be pessimistic, to those who might not see a better future, I tell you this: I firmly believe, as a person who tries to be better every day, God will not burden you with something you can't handle. God is merciful. Now, this is me, the elected official, speaking, from a faith perspective. God does not burden us with things that we don't have the capacity to handle. And if we aspire to be righteous in everything that we do, as Dr. King said, all what he wanted to do is God's will on earth. So if our high moral standard are the principles and the values that we associate with God, such as justice, love, compassion, mercy, then we must aspire to rise every day to promote these ideals and to embody and exemplify those morals. Because if I can't be preaching about hope if I'm pessimistic. I can't be preaching about courage if I'm always running away and being silent because I'm afraid about the consequences. My message to you: the world is ready for you. The world wants you desperately, and you will be unbelievably surprised how many people you'll be able to inspire, and how many people you'll be able to mobilize, and how many people will come back to you maybe in a day, a week, a month, 10 years, 50 years, and say, you remember that day when you said that word or you said that sentence? You changed my life. And because of that, I'm a better person today. And because of that, my family is better today. And my kids are better. And the next generation is better. We cannot give up. If you're a person of faith or non-faith, but you believe in the goodness of humanity, you believe in living in a better world, then we must be active. We can't be silent. So it gives me the honor of my life to be good trouble. It gives me the honor of my life to sacrifice my time, my effort, my energy, every ounce of anything that I have to put in the service of my fellow citizens in my nation and across the globe, because we all win when everybody succeeds, when everybody's dignified, when everybody's happy. So I encourage you, do not be discouraged, but it will take time. My advice to you is please, think critically about speaking authentically, because people get inspired by authentic talk. When you speak from the heart, you can connect at the heart level. And that's what we're missing in many of our conversations. Let's speak from the heart. Let's be authentic. Let's not put on all of these personas to try to impress one another, and leave what is really the core of our mission, which is to connect at the heart level, be authentic. As Ryan said, be vulnerable. We're not perfect, but when we work together, we win. We live in a better state, in a better country, in a better world. So please get engaged in your local neighborhood. Please get engaged in politics. Please get engaged in your school system. Please do whatever you can at your local level, based on what you can. Just do not be silent, because silence is betrayal.
Mhm. Thank you for that closing thought. And we appreciate the many hours that you put in for our fellow neighbors here in Indiana and in District 30. I'm going to turn to you, Ryan. You had one of your fellow dream keepers join you a minute ago, probably reminding you it's time for us to wrap this up. So, what would be your response to those who are weary, perhaps parents who are weary? And what word of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I like how you phrase it around parents, because I think this period, how when you first asked the question, my thought was you have to just be give yourself grace, and not compare. I think, especially on this day, when we reflect on Dr. King, you're just like, how can some man make so much change? And it's just like, there's no way that I can do that. And
Mhm.
then like do nothing, right? Because it's just like I can't do this, so it's too much, right? Or you are doing things, you're doing so many things, you're spending so many hours at your kid's school volunteering, or you're doing this with your church, or you're doing this with this organization. You're just like, well, I don't see the change, and it's just like, okay, stop comparing yourself to somebody who has a different calling than you, right?
Mhm.
Like, because you're doing this, you're both doing God's work, and you are in the lane that God wants you in. And I think I maybe be talking to myself right now. So if this doesn't resonate with anybody, I'm sorry, but I'm still going to tell myself this. It's because like I said, like it's often I just look at other folks, and it's just in different life situations, and they're different growing up, they're different traumas, and compared to mine and those around me, it's just like, why can't I do this? Why can't I be like them? And you get tired, and you just feel like you're not creating any change. And it's just like, you're not them. And you see the task that's in front of you. Go ahead and accomplish that. Well, that's not a license to be lazy, right? That's not a license to see issues and do nothing. But recognize what you can do. Recognize the community that's around you, how you can input yourself in that community, and lean on that community, and share it in your weirdness, and be, just to say it again, be vulnerable and say like, hey, I'm feeling tired. I can't do this right now, and it is okay, right? The us making it to our mountaintops, it is not dependent on just you, you alone, right? It's gonna be a collective effort, and it is okay to recognize like, hey, I'm tired, or maybe I've taken on too much right now, right? It's gonna be a long game. I think Dr. King did say like arc of history does bend towards justice, and we've seen that. Like, we see it getting better and getting better. So let's continue to fight, but have some grace for yourself, and recognize like it's not all on your shoulders.
Mhm. So we do this work together. We give ourselves grace. We also don't get complacent in that place, but keep moving. Reverend Anetra, as you think about people of faith and what weariness we may feel in this pandemic, what words of advice would you share with us to keep moving forward?
Take naps. I wholeheartedly support the nap ministry. Let me tell you, I will take a nap in a minute midday. You hear me? And then get up and get back to the emails and back to the word. But Audre Lorde says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and it is an act of political warfare. And so we're in a time of deep grief and crisis, combined with isolation and just so much. We're surrounded by so much uncertainty. And we are experiencing many a soul weariness, a deep soul weariness, that we're often unable to describe. And many times we don't see it coming. I consider myself, I'm a very strong person. I rarely get ill. And there have been some times when I just have not been able to get out of bed, and I can't tell you why, other than I cannot get out of bed today. And so I think of the words of musical genius Kirk Franklin. I need you to survive. I need you. You need me. We are all a part of God's body. And so I need you to survive. And so my word, take naps, drink water, remember to take your medication. You can get so busy doing this work that it's you just get to it from the time that you wake up. To the time you go to bed, you can forget to take your medication. I've been there where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've had such a productive time, but I've not taken my blood pressure meds in 3 days because I'm just doing the work from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed. Prioritize your mental health. See your therapist regularly if you have one, and if you don't have one, listen, I am all about Jesus and therapy. Praise God. You could take the word, and if you need a pill, take your pill. Ain't no shame in it. We have got to remove the stigma around prioritizing our mental health. You ain't crazy. Go see your therapist. So there's a blessing in just talking through situations. And I would say my encouragement is also to set a reminder to check on folk. I don't know. I can go so long without just remembering to just pick up a phone and call my girlfriends, call my mom. I'm realizing there are so many people I care about that are close to me. And geez, it seems like the only time we talk is when they pick up a phone and call me. That cannot be so. And so maybe someone else is just dealing with just the busyness of the work, but set a reminder to check on your girlfriends, send that quick text. And Senator Fadi, mentioned that, like, yes, we have a lot of work, but the work where, we're impassioned, to do the work, and the work inspires. And so Reverend Katie Geneva Cannon says, do the work your soul must have. Does the work make your soul happy when you do it? If not, maybe you're focusing on the wrong thing, right? So what's the thing that you're passionate about, that you have a burden about, that's on your mind, right? Do that work, because then you'll be energized to do it. So do the work your soul must have. Take naps, drink water, take your meds, set a reminder and check on your folks, prioritize your mental health care. And lastly, Matthew 11:28, come to me all who are weary burdened, and I will give you rest. Do not forsake your personal time with God. Too often we put it on the back burner and we give God that's what's left. And we don't want to be found so busy working for God that we lose our connection and our relationship with God. So keep that devotion time a priority.
Well, we all have our to-do lists after this conversation, and I know you will join me in thanking these incredible dream keepers, Ryan, Fadi, and Netra. We are so grateful for the work that you are doing in our community, for keeping the legacy and the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King alive and well in what you are doing today. Thank you for your time. Anetra, we're praying for your healing. Again, you are still the most fabulous COVID patient I think any of us have ever seen, but we are inspired by your responses to these questions and your challenges to us today. I want to close with just a couple of ways that you can get involved in being a dream keeper. And the first you've heard about is our Freedom School. It is launching this summer. We hope to have 100 scholars at St. Luke's so that they will help us live into this mission of being a justice seeking and anti racist church, and that they will be able to see that they are our future justice leaders and that we have something to learn with and from them. So you'll see linked in this conversation ways that you can hear more about that work and how you can use your gifts to make that a reality. You'll also find our Minority Business Incubator. We are always looking for entrepreneurs and business leaders to be a part of that work and continue to raise up these next minority business owners who will be launching their businesses in the next several months. And then we also invite you, as Reverend Antra talked about, your own devotional time, your own growing and learning time. Ryan talked about King being a lifelong learner. There are so many book studies and classes and small groups where you can grow in your knowledge and awareness of anti-racism and justice-seeking work. And last year, St. Luke's launched our own antiracistindie.com as a resource for our community, for people to find those resources. And they are targeted to where you are on your journey of learning, whether you are awakening, as Anitra talked about, or you've been doing this work for a while and you want to go deeper. We also have many resources for parents and for children. And so again, we are so grateful to our dream keepers. We're grateful for you for being with us. And we pray that you will use what you learned today to keep making this dream a reality. And together, we'll get to that mountain range, not just that mountaintop, where we can answer, the children are well. Thank you for being with us today. And we look forward to working alongside you to keep this dream alive.